On now, Tennessee lawmakers are again pushing for the so-called Pot for Potholes Act, a bill that would legalize marijuana and use tax revenue to fix roads and infrastructure across Tennessee. Action News 5's Caitlin Miller spoke with a state representative, one of the bill's co-sponsors, about why she hopes her fellow lawmakers will give Pot for Potholes the green light.
This Wednesday marks Cannabis Day on the Hill here in Tennessee, where advocates, medical marijuana patients, and farmers all gather at the state capitol to push for marijuana reform like this. And Representative Bain says that she's hopeful their legislation, which was struck down last year, might have a better chance of getting through this time around.
I know I hit 3 potholes coming into work today, and every time I drive under a bridge, I kind of look up to make sure it's not cracking.
It's a complaint every Tennessean on the road, including Representative Bain, knows well.
And that's not a good feeling as a legislator, and that's definitely not a good feeling as a Tennessean.
And in Memphis, it can become a costly inconvenience that many like Erica say they've dealt with time and time again.
I'm not gonna lie, I broke a couple tires on the road. I would love if they got fixed.
The Pot for Potholes Act would legalize marijuana for adults 21 and older and create a regulated system for growing, testing, and selling cannabis. A 15% tax on sales would mostly go to roads and bridges.
So right now we have a $58 billion transportation backlog in infrastructure needs, and there is no revenue to fill that void. Our state budget revenues are flat.
The bill failed in a House subcommittee last March, but Bain says new leadership at the state level and a national push towards decriminalization may open the door for a different conversation. And she isn't alone. Memphis State Representative Antonio Parkinson is also backing marijuana reform. His Freedom to Farm Act would allow one adult per household to grow marijuana plants at home if passed this year. New numbers from Massachusetts also helped relaunch the Pot for Potholes push. The state, with a population similar to Tennessee's, generated $289 million in cannabis tax revenue in 2025. And though Tennessee's laws are very different, and Massachusetts has allowed recreational marijuana since 2016, the bill's co-sponsors see potential they say Tennessee is missing.
To ensure that, as they say, big marijuana, big cannabis, doesn't come in and kind of swoop the monetary advantage that we have locally owned, homegrown businesses that could, hold the infrastructure needed for this industry.
State Senator Heidi Campbell will be presenting this bill in Judiciary next week, and then it will be in lawmakers' hands to decide whether the Pot for Potholes Act will survive. Here in Memphis, Caitlin Miller, Action News 5.